Today, I am going to be talking more about using life's manure for spiritual growth. And in my previous talk, I concentrated on looking within, looking at our habitual patterns, looking what we have, how we behaved in the past, how we responded, finding that we have some faults and finding that we have some qualities, finding that we have some work to do. You might say composting the manure that we are discovering. Today, I am going to broaden this by actually going into some situations that we can find ourselves in and paths that we can go down that lead to bad outcomes and how to work with these specifically. So this is more than just, you might say, self-discovery and learning more about yourself and making friends with yourself. To begin with, I wanted to talk about worrying. I think I'll start with plane travel. A lot of people don't like to fly. I think they call it fear of flying. And it turns out that I believe mile for mile, it's 10 times more dangerous in terms of the chance of death driving in a car than flying in a commercial airliner. Yet most people aren't that afraid of driving in a car, whereas you get in a plane, the fear is there. The point being that the fear is not necessarily related to what the fear is of. I once was on a propeller-driven plane, which flies at lower altitude, and we went through some pretty rough air. And the woman next to me kept, like that, and grabbing a hold of my arm. It really was upsetting to her that the plane was going up and down unpredictably. But this was her reaction. I wasn't doing that. The point that I'm getting at is that we need to be aware of what we are afraid of, what we worry about. And I thought of a good example this morning, and that is if you go to a concert, a performance, a musical, nowadays you'll have this huge flat screen above the stage, and there will be people there with cameras trying to stay out of sight, but then there is someone in a control room that will show what different cameras are seeing to, you might say, focus in on a particular action, a particular singer, whereas you in the audience are stationary and you just have this same view of the whole performance if you didn't have this flat screen above the stage. The point that I'm making is if you're just sitting in your seat and looking at the stage, you've got one view. When you look at the flat screen, the view is, first of all, it's variable and it's focused in on one particular, perhaps, person from a particular perspective. So actually, during a performance, there are multiple perspectives. And it is that way in our life too, that there are multiple ways of looking at the same situation, whether it be what's going through our mind or what's going on outside of ourselves. If it's more like in a auditorium, when you're looking at the stage, you're getting, you might say, a bigger picture. It might not be as clear what the details are, but then when you go to the flat screen, you're seeing details, but you're only seeing certain details. You're only focusing in on part of it, and you might say you're missing the rest, at least visually. What you're hearing is going to be the same unless they focus in on the drummer or the singer or whatever. They can do that too. The point being is that when we go through our lives, we frequently focus in on certain things and ignore everything else. You focus in that you're afraid of flying, and then the plane goes up and down, and You don't think about, well, how many of these flights do they have that never have a problem in terms of meeting the ground unexpectedly? One way to talk about it, a term that I think describes it pretty well, is over-focusing. I read a story. This was just probably a made-up story, but trying to prove a point. Let's make this up completely. A room that you've never been in before. And I say, there's $100 bill in that room, and if you can find it, it's yours. And so you go into the room and you are looking and looking and looking and going through drawers, looking under the rug, maybe under the mattress if there's a mattress there, behind pictures hanging on the wall. And then you finally find it and you come out and you're happy. And then I say, well, what did the room look like? I don't know. It certainly doesn't look like it now. Would you put the room back the way it looked like when you went in? That's what we do in life. See what we're looking for or what we're trying to find, and we don't see so much else. In Buddhist terms, it's called ignorance. This just not paying attention, not seeing things clearly. It's frequently associated with the animal realm, but we in the human realm can specialize in it too. The Tibetan word for animal in terms of a general overall category means one that walks hunched over, that they just look at what's in front of them and don't see much beyond that. So that's what I'm talking about, is how we just see a little bit and miss much of the rest. Depending upon what our habitual pattern is, we can think that what we're in is a situation that makes us uncomfortable, brings up fear, causes us to worry, or we can have a, you might say, a love and light approach to it, which everything is just fine. And I'm talking not about Buddhism, but more of a ignoring the difficulties that we run into in life. Both of them are a form of ignorance. So getting to know ourselves is getting to know how our mind works and where it goes in terms of our habitual patterns. In terms of worrying, this is what I have discovered about worrying. I used to be pretty good at it, and I still do worry. It's not like I never worry. Basically, worry doesn't do anything. It doesn't accomplish anything. If you're worried about something happening, then, well, do something about it. If you're worried about having an accident in an airplane, then I guess you could not buy a ticket. Or you could work on that phobia. Just worrying won't accomplish it. You're worrying about something that could happen in the future rather than something that will happen in the future. And basically what's going on is you don't have control. And there's much in life that we do not have control of, and yet we still worry about it. Shantideva has said that if you can do something about it, why be unhappy? And if you can't do anything about it, why be unhappy? So if you are concerned about something, do something about it. And then when you realize you've reached your limit of what you can do about it, then let go of it. I remember decades ago seeing a woman being interviewed on television, and she was talking about going through the grieving process. I can't remember if it was a husband, a child, a parent, but she said that it was really difficult for her, this grieving. Eventually, she came to realize, because she was having, I believe the term would be survivor's guilt. If I would have just done something different, the person would be alive. Or I wish I would have said these things and made peace with the person while they were still alive. Or a number of other types of scenarios, but there was some guilt and regret related to the death as well as the grieving process. But the woman said that what helped her was when she eventually realized that she would rather feel guilty than feel powerless. And when she realized that she actually was powerless, the guilt disappeared, or at least significantly decreased. So that's the first point that I want to make. So here is a quote. This is from Charles Dickens. It's a beginning of Tale of Two Cities. Now, this book was published in 1859, and it is about Paris and London in 1775. So this is an important point. So I'm going to read it here. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. So he was looking back there over 75 years into the past. And I think that last part, the noisiest critics looked at the superlative degree only, pretty much applies to the present situation today. So there are a lot of superlatives about the times that we live in, and we can also use a lot of superlatives about the situation we are in. And again, this can lead to over-focusing and making things more serious than they really are, or perhaps less serious than they really are. What's important is to have balance and to have a broader view, a broader perspective, to see what we're experiencing and the layers of judgment that we are putting on what we are experiencing. Now, to remind you about what I have been talking about from last week is that by understanding ourselves, understanding the way our mind works, the way our mind interacts with other people and outer phenomena, we can become happier, we can become more content, we can become kinder to ourselves and others. We can enjoy life more. And of course, we can develop our true potential and travel the path to complete Buddhahood. Meditation is really an important tool that when we learn to meditate and have a regular practice, this allows us to have a more stable mind, that when something unexpected jumps up, we might lose our balance, but we quickly regain the balance rather than, shall we say, floored or completely thrown off and engaging in some very bizarre thinking and emotions. So I think the next part here to talk about is the self. In Buddhism, we talk about no self. So the question is, what is this no self about? It doesn't mean that there is nothing. Tralek Rinpoche has talked about we need a healthy self-image. But the way Karmapa explains it, I think makes a lot of sense and is easy to understand. He talks about this self as being a fabricated self. And fabricate means it's made out of parts and pieces. It's put together. And these parts and pieces are added as we develop. That when we start out as a newborn, someone else gives us our name. We don't choose that. It comes from outside, and eventually we learn to associate that name with who we are. And as we develop, then we gradually learn various things about ourselves and our bodies. We learn to very quickly make noise when we're hungry, and we need our diapers changed, and we gradually learn how to be toilet trained. We learn how to feed ourselves. We learn how to get our parents' attention without crying. And then there's the terrible twos where we go around developing, I like this, I want this, and if I don't get it, you're going to hear from me. I remember when my son was young, we would take him to his grandparents who doted on him. And we would stay for a week or two. And when we would go back home, he did not get the level of care that he had gotten accustomed to. And he was quite difficult to live with for a week or two until he realized his grandma is not here anymore. As we get older, we have more experiences, we have memories, we start bringing in what other people tell us about ourselves, what we see on TV, social media, video games, all kinds of things, ads. Our teachers tell us things, our classmates tell us things, and on and on and on. And we continue to put this idea together of who we are. And it continues into adult life. If we look at who we think we are, it's just made up of parts and pieces that we have assembled as we mature and age, and some things we have discarded. One story that I think is illustrative of this is I went to a wedding quite a few years ago, and you had a little boy and a little girl there. I think they walked down the aisle holding the bride's train, and the little boy carried the ring. And after the wedding, which went off quite well, there was a banquet, and then towards the end of the banquet, an open mic, and friends of the newlyweds would go up there and tell stories. And then the little boy, probably about 4 years old, went up to the microphone. He had a very short speech. He said, "I'm cute. I know I'm cute, and I want to thank all of you for telling me I'm cute." He got another little part to put in to his fabricated ego. I have a feeling that when he reaches 50, he's not going to be saying that. The other aspect of fabricate is to make up, like fabricate evidence. And so this fabricated self has that element to it also, that it is a fiction. This is what we take with us through life. And then we have all kinds of expectations based on this fabrication. If we really examined ourselves clearly, we would find that we have hundreds of expectations, maybe even thousands of expectations. I will say this, it's much easier to see these in other people than it is to see it in ourselves. For some reason or another, other people can be transparent when they have unrealistic expectations, but ours aren't so transparent because we take them pretty seriously. So here is my list of unrealistic expectations we have of samsara based on our fabricated self. The first is I'm the most important person in the room, and I take this room with me wherever I go. And it's actually a pretty big room. The second is that I should be respected just because who I am, because I'm the most important person in the room. Other people have to earn my respect. This is important. Other people have to earn it. The third is others should live up to my expectations. And sometimes, especially in a close relationship, I shouldn't even have to tell my partner what my expectations are. They're supposed to know. And of course, other people don't live up to our expectations. The fourth is I should not be harmed in any way, whether it be physically harmed or just being irritated. I had some friends over visiting me recently, and they were talking about how frustrating it was standing in the checkout line at Walmart when the person in front of them had a big shopping cart full of things and it was taking forever. And you had the choice of the self-checkout, but that was a hassle too. Well, this is life. If the little things are that upsetting, what happens when a big thing happens? I remember this happened out at KTD a long, long time ago, probably about 1990. They had the old house there, and there was a dining room. And this seemed kind of bizarre to me at the time, but there was in New York, they called it a soda machine that you put money in and then, push the button and the soda pops out. And Barter Toko Rinpoche was there. He went over to the machine, put his money in, pushed the button, and nothing came out. That even if you are a Tulku and called a Rinpoche, the soda machine still won't work. So it's good to relax a little bit when things don't go your way, that it's not a big deal, it's normal. Again, this was my experience a few days ago. I was down at Rochester, Minnesota, seeing a doctor, went to the parking ramp, and on the way out, I put my credit card in, and it was declined. Well, I put another credit card in and that was accepted. But when I got home, what I found out was that I had exceeded my credit limit on the credit card because Tuesday I had been to the dentist and had the beginnings of 2 crowns, and they wanted me to pay in advance. And although I had health insurance, the health insurance was not accepting it because of a glitch. And so I had gone over my limit, and on and on and on. I'm still working on the health insurance glitch. I took care of the credit card. But I mean, these minor things happen all the time, and we can get very upset about this and even feeling like the universe is against us. That leads to the unrealistic expectation number 5. Life should be fair, and I'm the Supreme Court. I get to decide what is fair and what is not fair. So take a good look at these expectations and other expectations you have and realize that maybe they're not so realistic after all. And you can kind of relax a little bit. We can learn patience. We can make friends with ourselves. And this also helps us relate a little bit better to other people because other people are having these same experiences and perhaps they don't have any tools to work with them. They don't meditate. They don't understand that this is normal. The next thing I want to talk about is blame. This is a big thing in the world today. We run into difficulties and we generally have 2 places that we choose to go to. One is this difficulty has arisen and it's my fault. I keep making the wrong decisions. I keep screwing up. There's something wrong with me. I'm a terrible person. I'm hopeless. I'm supposed to be perfect, or at least I can perfect myself, even if I'm not perfect now. And this, of course, leads to guilt. Guilt is basically a feeling of I've done something wrong, but it has a resume with it. It's not just that I've done this thing wrong. It is, but I've done that wrong and I've done something else wrong. And we've got instance after instance after instance where we have screwed up, and it proves that there is something fundamentally wrong with us. Now, it might seem bizarre, but what this leads to is, well, since this is fundamentally flawed, I don't have to do anything. I'll just keep telling myself how bad I am and blame myself and don't have to take responsibilities. It leads to depression, actually. It's a downward spiral. You feel helpless, you feel hopeless, you've got anger towards yourself because you feel you're a bad person. The anger can spill out to others as well. And then there's the element of laziness. In Buddhism, there are 3 types of laziness. This is the thing about Buddhism, is they spell these things out pretty clearly, even before Western psychology came into play. These 3 types of laziness goes back probably to the time of the Buddha or soon after. And the one is, I call it couch potato laziness, where you wake up in the morning and you lie in bed and you start thinking about what you have to do. And of course, since you're blaming yourself, you're thinking that I can't do this. It's just too much. And you keep thinking about what you're supposed to be doing. And you come up with 100 reasons why you can't do it. So you need to go back to sleep so you can build up your energy so you can do it. And then you get up, eat, and then maybe you have to sit down and rest because it's been pretty tiring fixing your meal and cleaning up if you cleaned up, but probably the sink is full of dirty dishes anyway, and so you just put them in there. And this is couch potato laziness. The next form of laziness is busyness, where you keep really busy doing things that are trivial and you don't do the things that are important, but you're always busy. And then the third type is self-deprecation, which is, oh, I couldn't accomplish that. What's the point of trying? So take your pick. Each one of them leads to not getting done what needs to be done. And again, it leads to feeling helpless and hopeless, and it ignores the fact that you have Buddha nature, and your Buddha nature is as good as anybody else's. It's kind of like seeing yourself as a lump of coal when in actuality you are a diamond that just has some, you might say, some manure on it that needs to be cleaned off. The other direction we go with blame is that it's somebody else's fault. I'm a victim. Samsara is supposed to be perfect, or at least perfectible, and it's picking on me, you might say. I'm a victim. I'm getting screwed. Here we blame others without taking any responsibility for our feelings and our emotions. Interestingly enough, it's a form of entrapment, that you're giving up your power to others and their behavior. It negates free will. When you refuse the role of victim, you take the power back. A victim wants to change others or want others to change. Then when they don't, you get angry at them. It again is a dead end, and it's easy to kind of vacillate between those two types of blame. At one moment, you might be blaming yourself and feeling really bad about yourself. And then later on, you're mad at somebody because they have made you a victim of their behavior, whatever it is. Well, we don't have the power to prevent our suffering by controlling others or by passing laws. We try to pass laws, but they don't seem to be totally effective. All you have to do is look at the news today. Who's going to pass the laws? You have one side that says we need these laws and another side that says these laws are totally interfering with my freedom, and the other side, we need to pass these laws, and this, no, these are interfering with my freedom. The bottom line is that regardless of what politics and what government is going on, we still have the ability to control or learn how to control our own mind and escape from being a victim. A victim creates apathy, resentment, anger, hopelessness, helplessness. And it also has this assumption that we should never have to experience any difficulties. This goes back to these expectations of life that I talked about earlier. And just like with blaming yourself being a downward spiral leading towards depression, this is a downward spiral leading to more suffering, way beyond the actual pain. And here we are looking at samsara like it's a diamond when it's actually a lump of coal. We have to accept samsara as samsara in order to make progress. We have to avoid spreading blame around. We need to take responsibility, and we have to see ourselves more clearly. I like to explain it this way in terms of being a victim. It's easy to see other people when they are, you might say, playing the victim card, but we need to see it when we are playing the victim card. In my lifetime, I have seen a new card, which is a survivor. I'm a survivor of cancer. I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. I'm a survivor of take your pick of something, some negative experience. The thing is that either way, you're defining yourself on some very negative experiences you've had. This goes back to the fabricated self. And if you look carefully, you'll see that you have had a huge number of experiences throughout your whole life, and you continue to have experiences. And if you look at yourself as a person who has had some negative experiences along with some positive experiences, look at yourself more as an experiencer rather than dividing yourself on negative experiences. That gives you a lot more space to change and to grow. It doesn't define you on the worst things that you have experienced. You actually are a potential Buddha. You have Buddha nature. You have this inherent primordial goodness, for lack of a better word. So it's good to look at ourselves in this way. And when we start finding that we have had these misconceptions, to instead of thinking, oh, there, I see it now, it just proves that over and over again, I keep making the wrong choices and the wrong decisions. Here I'm wrong again. It's just another wrong on this long resume that I have of things that I've done wrong. Whereas a much better approach is, oh, I see this mistake now. I'm going to work on changing. This is kind of the difference between guilt and remorse. Either way, you see a fault, but with the remorse, you have the attitude of, I'm going to work on this, and it's this that I'm going to work on rather than trying to work on this whole thing that began at birth or perhaps previous lives. You start working at one part at a time. So it's important to realize that, and instead of seeing it as a solid whole, just start looking at the parts and seeing that even the parts have pieces, and then it becomes much more manageable. Next is I want to talk a little bit about forgiveness. And this is important because this goes back to when we start seeing our faults, whether it be that we're playing the victim or we're blaming ourselves. Forgiveness means change and transformation. Really, our minds, our idea of who we are, and so forth, are very pliable. They can change, and they can change very easily if we are open to it, if we are flexible. A seed never sees the flower. A seed is potential. You can't tell the color of a flower from a seed. At least I can't. Maybe some botanists could, but I can't. The seeds have a protective cover, but the cover has to be breached for the seed to grow. In other words, the seed has to be destroyed. And the seed is claustrophobic, it's cramped, there's no room for growth. So for that seed to turn into a flower, it needs the right conditions. And guess what? Manure and composted manure is very healthy for flowers if it's used right. You don't take a wheelbarrow full of uncomposted manure and dump it on the flower, trying to get it to grow. You have to use a little bit of wisdom. But when you have the nourishment, water, warmth, space to grow, and sunlight, it will grow. Forgiveness creates space. The core word that I like to say, or the root word of forgiveness, is give. So forgiveness is giving up the past. It doesn't mean you forget it, because you can learn a lot from the past, but it's giving up resentment, giving up wanting to have a better past, giving up wanting to change the past. This is what happened, this is what is, and you give forgiveness in the present. And the reason why you do it in the present, because you can't do it in the future and you can't do it in the past. But by doing it in the present, you're now creating space to grow in the future. It's a bit like weeding flowers. You weed in the present, and then that gives the flower space to grow in the future. In a way, you're also giving healing, you're giving comfort, you're giving protection, you're giving understanding and ease and so forth. You're giving up wanting others to suffer because what they have done. You're also giving up punishing yourself. I like to use the example of, because I've owed money in the past and I can relate to this, wouldn't it be nice if the banker wrote you a letter and said that your loan is forgiven? You don't have to make any more payments. It's never happened to me, but forgiveness is a bit like that. You don't have to make any more payments of anger, whether it be towards yourself or towards other people. So forgiveness puts a fence between yourself in the present and the past. It protects you from all kinds of negative thoughts that we bring with us from what has happened in the past. And with that note, I think I am going to sum this up about forgiving ourselves. We have all harmed ourselves in many ways, but it's very easy to magnify it and even imagine it. And one of my favorite examples of how we blow it out of proportion, if you've been to a dinner party and you're a happy person and you've been smiling, and then you have to go to the bathroom and you look in the mirror and there's this spinach stuck between your teeth. And you've been smiling the last 2 hours, and people have been seeing this, and you go, oh, what are people thinking? I've made an idiot out of myself. Well, all you've done is bruised your sensitive little ego. And maybe it's a little humbling, and humility is a quality. So if you can look at these things a little differently, you can create a lot of space. I've got a memory problem. I've had it for decades. And I remember when I would go, I forgot when I remembered something, and then I would get down on myself for forgetting. And what actually was happening, if you look at it closely, was at that moment, I remembered. If you forgot, you don't remember. And you want to remember. So why not say, oh, I'm glad I remembered finally, as opposed to beating yourself up for being forgetful. These are the tricks our ego plays on us. Can't say I always do it, but I like to think, oh, I remembered. This is good to remember. What we really want to do is learn how to be kind to ourselves. And forgiveness is a good tool to do this, to be gentle with ourselves, to encourage ourselves to be better, but to do it in a way that produces good results. It's so often that what we do is we beat ourselves up thinking that by our inner critic constantly nagging us about where we have screwed up, that somehow we are going to be better. So pay attention to your inner critic, that voice that when you meditate, you start listening to, or at least becoming aware of, and realize that there will never be a weight loss book that says, if I just keep telling myself that I'm fat and ugly enough, I will lose weight. And it could be any kind of self-improvement that you're working on. It doesn't work. Be kind to yourself, be encouraging, be gentle. That works.